Good afternoon, everyone. It is Kelly Harrell with MoneyTreeAcademy.com, and I am coming back to you again today. I was going to talk with you about one of the really cool archetypes, money archetypes, the creator artist, but something that was occurring in my life today made me actually want to cover one of the more challenging ones, and that is the victim money archetype. Now, before I get started, I just want to say that the victim archetype, actually two things I want to say. The victim archetype is one of the most, if not the most difficult archetype to try and to work through and to heal. And that's thing number one. It is well, it's just a difficult archetype that has so many things, and it's very invasive into a person's life. But the second thing that I want you to know before I start talking about it is that this archetype is not who a person is. It's the way that something has been constructed in their life, and it can be removed. Takes a while, but it can be pulled out and a person can go toward a different place. And I'll talk a little bit more about that from just a personal experience I've had that's not directly related to money, but can start to illustrate some of the victim archetype for you through just my own personal experience. So what is it about the victim archetype? So many of the characteristics for them are, I mean, you could kind of probably come up with some of your own ideas of it very quickly. The victim archetype, even around money, is prone to blaming others. So the victim archetype will say that, they are poor because of someone else or some other thing. They are prone to blaming others, prone to blaming other situations, blaming some aspect of life as being what is something external to themselves that's responsible for how their outcomes are with money. They can get very emotional. They will use a lot of drama to illustrate and get their way, to get the attention of what they're feeling inside. And it's often the pain that they have inside. I mean, you start to see it come out through some of the emotional pieces. I mean, we have to understand that there's so much going on with that victim archetype that they will wrap themselves in many, many layers of defense because of how painful some of the feelings are inside. So it's much easier for them to express these emotions, which are really just the tip of the iceberg of what is going on within. So the victim archetype, though it may seem very dramatic and it may be very difficult to deal with, there's also some compassion that needs to be in there because there's a lot of beating up on the self that's happening within. The victim archetype also tends to live in the past and thinking about times that maybe were better or times that were worse and holding on to those things to further edify the victim stance. And many times you can see that happen with perhaps kids who got adults who were lost access to the inheritance of wealth from another parent. There can be some victim behaviors that can come out of that. Perhaps they had a parent that was a tyrant, and the child never, had that safety or was manipulated in some way with money. It's such a common pairing to have a tyrant parent who's very controlling around money and have the child, grow up and feel some of that victim stance and always have money be dangled in front of, and you can't ever get to it. And that can really victimize a young person. Financial irresponsibility is another area. Because the victim is feeling all these feelings inside, they will use money in ways that will keep them and further, again, edify something of a poverty state. It's as if the subconscious is saying, hey, you're not good enough, you're a victim, and they will create that in their own financial world as well, so that the pattern of being disabled in some way is continued. It's like the physical modeling what's going on, or the external physical modeling what's going on in the internal. So as a result, there's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, a secret longing inside of the victim to have some type of rescue. And that's often why a victim can pair up with a tyrant, because the tyrant will keep that control and keep them in that victim place, and that can be what feels normal. Victims, because they have so much inner resentment inside, will often be very resentful toward others. Because if you can't love yourself, it's very difficult to love and forgive and trust and just allow other people to be who they need to be. So the money victim will often show up in that way. Addictive. So addictive shopping, addictive attacks, addictive with substance abuse will often happen for a victim. When you feel that much pain inside, using substances helps numb that pain and keep those feelings suppressed so that you don't have to deal with it. And that's very common. And it might sound like I'm talking about psychology and therapy and things like that, and to a large degree I am. In fact, more therapists and psychologists need to be more aware of how deeply money plays into our psychology, because it sits at the root of so much. So when you have kids who are young people who are destabilized or threatened or manipulated with money, it just creates this dynamic that threads throughout all of life. And money sits at such a fundamental core of everything. I mean, we need money to buy our most basic needs. And you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Money buys what? It buys our food, our water, our shelter, and our safety. You can't get those things freely anymore. You need money to have those things. So when we feel victimized, especially if we feel like our very survival needs are threatened, it's very common to have, that victim orientation happen. Now, victim can also happen in wealthy families, where children of very wealthy families can be very manipulated by the wealth and the promise of wealth, and that they have to follow certain pathways with their career, or they have to behave in certain ways, or they have to marry someone, or they have to let someone else control the wealth, and there they can be highly controlled in terms of not being able to follow what their heart says. And that often creates an addictive response. That's happened to many women, as a matter of fact. Many women of very wealthy families have, let's say they were even given an inheritance early on and never encouraged to follow their own truth or their own path. So a victim can come out of that situation too, because here they have all this money. They don't have to work for it. No one's ever given them permission. They've not known necessarily how to give themselves permission to be what they want. And sometimes when we have money, we get lazy. We don't necessarily reach through our fears to figure it out. And so having too much money can actually lead many times to a victim type of money behaviors and habits and beliefs. So it's not just people who don't have enough. It can also be people who have too much. It happens a lot more than you would ever realize. So there's just this kind of powerlessness that happens with the victim, and whether they're earning very little or they have too much, it really doesn't matter. Secretive can be another quality of it. So for the victim, they have to get to this place where they understand the core of those roots. What led them to this victim place? And again, it's not who the person is. It's just the way things have gotten constructed in the life over time. And it happens. And it's not something to judge. It's something to observe and learn from. Because it's like our darkest places are often the journeys that we are meant to take to come out on the other side and learn something beautiful about ourselves. the victim could actually be, if embraced by the right person, can actually turn into the most powerful hero's journey. So, what does that have to do with me? So some of you know that over the past years, I've been dealing with some chronic issues around my spine and my neck. And the pain triggers a lot of anxiety. When things go out up here, the pain triggers a lot of anxiety and frustration. There are times when I feel so debilitated by what happens when things go out of whack that it can bring me to tears. And there are times when it's been depressing. And there are times when I have felt some of those victim dynamics happening in myself. Now, that usually only lasts for a few hours or maybe for a day. Sometimes it's actually lasted for a couple of weeks. And what the victim has to do, and what I know in myself that I have to do, is I have to transform that experience, that feeling, that frustration of being stuck. And I know that there's somewhere in there, and it's indicating to me that I need to take some kind of responsibility to transform my outcomes. And so today, I was right back up in Santa Fe. I had a really rough week this week. I was up in Santa Fe last week to have some work done on this area of my body. And that day after the treatment, I felt like dog shit. And I was really suffering for the majority of the day. I had to come home and go to bed for 4 hours. And yeah, I felt frightened and I felt scared of what I was feeling inside and so frustrated because I want to get through this. And I got better by that night. I was feeling much better. And then for the next few days or so, I felt actually pretty good. And then yesterday, slam down. Something went out of place again. I was just beside myself and, thinking, what in the world? And then within a few hours, I was able to get things back into place. And so it's like I'm continuously peeling away layers, learning what may be triggering this physically, maybe even emotionally or structurally, or something that I'm doing with my body or my mind. And I'm learning from this every single day. And so today I went up again for another treatment, and I feel pretty good right now. Not perfect, but I do feel pretty good right now, and I'm hopeful. And I realize that when we have things that we feel victimize us in some way, it's not a quick and easy journey. We don't just say, hey, I'm not going to be a victim anymore today. That never happens, right? So it's really about peeling away the layers and sticking with it and realizing that we are human and that we can learn from ourselves. And I have a neighbor over here who's just started up his little tester motorcycle. He's going to ride it around the block to warm it up like he does every day. I don't know why, but every day he starts that thing up, he rides around the block, and he comes right back. So we'll hear him again here in just a second if I don't wrap up before he returns. But anyway, so I think you probably get my point, is that, with the victim, we can do it, but it is a journey. But it can be our hero's journey, our journey into our darkness, our journey into our light. So I think that's all I have to say today. If you have this happening in yourself, if you notice that this happens in someone else, maybe watch this again, learn a little bit more from it, just see if it brings up any things in you. And if it's something that you want help with for yourself, reach out to me, MoneyTreeAcademy.com. Go to my contact page and ask me for a free 30-minute session, and we can talk about what's going on for you. All right, that is it for today. Thank you for joining me, Kelly Harrell, MoneyTreeAcademy.com. Oh, he's back. Bye.